Tell us about him.
Okay, of course, I was a minister, I was an ambassador when it was several years ago, so I started my career in his system, but I worked as an ambassador, but I never voted for Lukashenko and had hopes that he would lose the next elections. But Lukashenko rigged the elections as usual, put in prison and killed his competitors. There were death squads in Belarus that killed, for example, former Vice Prime Minister Gonchar.
In 300 yards, keep left to continue on Fags Road.
Who only opposed him. Once Lukashenko told me personally, if you betray me, I will strangle you with my own hands. And that's not a threat. That's reality in Belarus.
Keep left to continue on Fags Road.
Cases. One of them is a death penalty. And Lukashenko repeated before the war in interview with Russian propagandist Vladimir Solovyov, yes, I promise.
In a quarter of a mile, turn left onto Great Southwest Road, A30.
We've seen what's happened to Russian opposition figures, people who've opposed Putin and have been poisoned and in some cases shot dead or sent to prison. You're now in Poland, you're in the West. Do you feel safe where you are?
Oh, if you have 8 criminal cases, if my daughter has a criminal case, if my cousin, he's a political prisoner and he's prisoned in jail now, so all my family under repression. If he showing pictures in night news, we're talking today with you at night news, but in night news in Belarus they can show how they will kill me, how they will kill Tikhanovskaya and some others. They're showing in night news. So if I can feel safe today, it's a difficult question. Not, but of course I'm still motivated and I want to struggle and I'm struggling. I'm opposition, one of the oppositioners for him. I have my own team, National Anti-Crisis Management, and we are struggling against dictatorship Lukashenko.
So in a relatively brief sentence or two, if you can, what do you want from the West when it comes to Belarus?
The same sanctions, because it's a strategic mistake. When you are providing sanctions against Putin, it's very important to provide the same sanctions against Lukashenko.
Take the second left onto Great Southwest Road, A30.
Criminal. They are two brothers, they are two allies. Only one ally of Putin is Lukashenko.
Continue on Great Southwest Road for 3/4 of a mile.
Against Ukraine. So it's very important. We start a campaign, Punish Putin's puppet, together with ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And our idea to punish only one ally of Putin. The same is if it's necessary to punish Putin. The same it's important to punish Lukashenko, dictator.
Or in short, don't be fooled. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I think we could call you almost the Navalny of Belarus, but it's been a great privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm turning now to a little bit, like 600 or 700 miles southwest to Arkady Ostrovsky, southeast I should say, was in Kiev. Arkady of The Economist, of course, you've joined us in the studio before, but you're now back in Kiev.
In a quarter of a mile, take the exit towards Heathrow Airport.
But the reason we've asked you on the show today is you said to me in the past that you were worried about growing Russophobia or hatred of all things Russian growing in the West. And given that, since then we've seen Russian tennis players barred from Wimbledon, we've seen Russia banned from the Eurovision Song Contest.
Take the exit towards Heathrow Airport.
Its residency by the Bolshoi, the Russian State Ballet of Siberia has been cancelled in Wolverhampton and Northampton, and on it goes.
In a quarter of a mile, keep left at the fork to continue towards Southern Perimeter Road.
Happening to people who happen to have been born in Russia, speak Russian, but are opponents of Putin in the West.
Thank you. It's great to be on your show, Andrew, again. And as I said, I am in Kyiv. There are air raid sirens just gone off. And as you hear those sirens and you see the suffering, extraordinary suffering that this country is going through, the atrocities.
Keep left at the fork.
It's very difficult to think about the Bolshoi or Russian culture to feel sorry for anybody, other than the people who are being killed, raped, tortured, and who have this war unleashed against them. And that's absolutely right. I don't think that Russia will ever...
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the second exit and stay on Southern Perimeter Road.
The reason I think it matters, however, is this war is fought on two fronts. And that's very important to understand, is what we're seeing in this war is the expression, it's the ultimate end of, unfortunately, what I would say is, and I'm not saying it lightly, is reincarnation or sort of rebirth of Russian fascism, which Europe and the world thought was over with the end of the Nazi Germany. It wasn't. It flourished. It's flourishing today. It came through in the late Stalinist period. Putin, of course, was born in 1952, just a year before Stalin's death.
Exit the roundabout onto Southern Perimeter Road. Continue on Southern Perimeter Road for 1.5 miles.
And because it is basically what it says on the box, it is a fascist ideology today in Russia. The security and safety of Ukraine depends on resistance in Russia. We're dealing with a country which is 3 times larger in population, which is better armed, which is richer, and which of course has nuclear arms. Ukrainians have fought extraordinarily bravely for 70 days and continue to fight, and in fact are launching a counter-offensive. But it would be naive to believe that Ukraine could really defeat Russia completely militarily. And therefore, it is absolutely essential that it's held by resistance inside Russia. And in that sense, those who are now making the anti-fascist movement, just as it was in the Nazi Germany, are essential for defeating Russian fascism.
Is that nonetheless an impossible hope? When you think that Navalny is in prison and going to a worse prison, we read, and the Russian middle classes seem to have rallied around Putin, at least for the time being. We haven't seen any of the big outdoor demonstrations that perhaps people expected when the sanctions began to bite. And given that Putin has such tight control over all the effective media in Russia, is it realistic to expect some kind of movement against him before this war ends?
Well, I think we are seeing some of it. I think you're right, and I think the key thing is that the elite has rallied around Putin out of fear, out of comfort, out of cynicism, out of degradation, whatever you want, what you want to use. In terms of the middle classes and the public opinion, we have to be careful. We're operating in the, we don't know really what Russians think. We don't know what sociology sort of suggests. I mean, I would argue, and I have some evidence for that. We have probably about 30-40% of Russian population opposed to the war. We have about 10-15% who are hysterical and completely pro-war, hawk and etc. And we have the swamp. We have the middle ground, which is siding with propaganda.
In a quarter of a mile, at Western Perimeter Road roundabout, take the first exit and stay on Southern Perimeter Road.
Is just gone to the worst jail, and to me there is a parallel. Today we are seeing, as we speak, unbelievable pictures are coming from Mariupol, where the Mariupol fighters continue to resist, inside Azovstal being bombarded from air, artillery fire, shelled, you name it. There is those fighters in Mariupol. There is Navalny effectively in the torture prison.
Exit the roundabout onto Southern Perimeter Road.
Those two processes. They tried to kill Navalny. They're trying.
In 200 yards, at the roundabout, take the second exit onto Airport Way A3113.
If you look at the series of very bizarre incidents over the past 2 weeks, we've seen fires in Russian research, military research facilities, as far as Perm, that's in the Urals, that's 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. We've seen Molotov
Exit the roundabout onto Airport Way.
in Moscow.
Continue on Airport Way for half a mile.
You know, there's numbers
This is really
conditions being, you know, arsoned. It's early days. We don't know. Look, the economic sanctions haven't worked. I mean, sanctions are working in terms of economy, but people haven't really felt the impact of those sanctions yet.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the fourth exit onto the M25 slip road to M4, M40.
It'll take time.
Cardi, it's an absolutely fascinating analysis, and we're going to be keeping watching over it for a long time to come. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I would say if the lesson from Belarus is don't leave Lukashenko, the lesson from Kiev is perhaps surprisingly don't give up on the good Russians. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to Tina Brown, former Vanity Fair editor and author of the Palace Papers, about Harry, Meghan and much more. You're listening to Andrew Marr on LBC, and Tim Humphrey has the news.
The Bank of England is warning the economy is likely to shrink next year as it raised interest rates to tackle the rising cost of living. It's lifted the base rate to 1%, its highest level in 13 years. The government has lost its challenge against the mother of baby P being released from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed 13 years ago over the toddler's death in...
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
To be raging at the besieged steel plant in Mariupol, despite Russia claiming a ceasefire is in place. Children are believed to be among Ukrainian civilians hiding in underground bunkers at the site. The weather, rain and drizzle becoming heavier tonight in Northern Ireland and southern Scotland, mostly dry with clear spells elsewhere, and a low of 8.
This is LBC.
Whoever they want to be in life, give them a great start with Wellkid. Carefully balanced, great-tasting vitamins and minerals for 4 to 12-year-olds, with specific nutrients such as zinc and vitamin D.
Continue for half a mile.
System function. The Wellkid range from Vitibiotics, from Boots, pharmacies and vitibiotics.com.
I'm security, and this is my fellow.
I'm his boy, Ease.
And together, we're eFax. While I keep faxes more secure than a Type 1's wallet, locked inside a safe.
I make sending all that important info super easy. Like, so easy you could do it lying down, blindfolded, with your hands tied. Anywhere, anytime. Like, in a click.
The ultimate combo.
eFax. It's secure easy. Head to efax.co.uk/...
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M25. Continue on M25 for 1 mile.
Feel good your way with Hey Car. T's and C's apply.
This is LBC. Tonight, with Andrew Marr.
And the time is more or less exactly 6:35. Now, we know what a big time this is, not just for the Queen herself, but the future of the monarchy. The Harry and Meghan split from the family and all the questions surrounding Prince Andrew have made the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations a bit more difficult than one might have hoped. A little earlier, I spoke to Tina Brown. She's the former Vanity Fair editor and author of The Palace Papers. And I started by asking her of her view of Prince Harry.
Very troubled and very insecure and very fragile. And one of the things that I learned, which surprised me actually, was that there had been a feeling in the palace that it was really pretty much inevitable that at some point Harry would go. And this was before Meghan came along. And one of them said to me, you know, we used to say the best thing a wife could do for Harry when she comes along finally is to sort of say, look, I can take...
In a quarter of a mile, at junction 15, use the left lane to take the M4 exit to Reading, Slough.
Because she had this dynamism, connections to the world outside, quite happy to pick up the phone and make, you know, find people to make deals. This is not the kind of...
Use the left lane to exit at junction 15, then keep left at the fork.
Before, you know, it was, the people that Harry dated were very much part of the sort of the upper class cadre of girls.
Keep left at the fork.
Dynamo, and she could make stuff happen, and she did make stuff happen, and he just found that enthralling.
I could see Harry coming back at some point.
Continue on M4 for 1.5 miles.
Immersed in the world of the royals for a while. I find it very, very hard to imagine Meghan putting up with, you know, opening motorway roundabouts and doing all the stuff the royals do day in, day out, and hospital extensions and so forth. I think she was last for about 5 minutes, if that. And therefore,
Well, he
I
certainly
wonder
did not like it.
what would happen to Harry and Meghan if he did come back into royal circles.
Well, for a start, I mean, I have to say, I think that they were a huge asset as a couple to the royals, and I think that they really needed them. I mean, they were the face of, younger, connecting to the young of England. To have a woman of colour in the royal family was, a wonderful thing for the connection to a more diverse nation. So there was a need to have them back, I think. There is a need, I think, to have them back. To your point about Meghan not wanting it, she certainly loathed her time in England. But how is it going to go in her new world? One of the things we have learnt about Meghan is that she's pretty practical about solutions when she wants to move on. There may come a point when she thinks, the biggest role I can still have is this role, coming back to England, at which point that will be the time to rediscover a deep love for the British and to realise, can pick up in a sense where they were left off, which is to do some of the modernising that actually does need to be done, and which I think is going to be now the focus. Ironically, they left just at the point when things were about to get really kind of, for them, perhaps more malleable to change. Because, when...
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Of course, but how do you think Charles and indeed his older brother would welcome Harry back into the family? Because there's been a lot of difficulty there, he said cautiously.
I think it's very difficult. I mean, family feeling is the problem. If I was there...
Keep right to stay on M4.
...comms strategist, I would say, find a way to choke on it and live with it and try to make it happen. The problem they...
Continue on M4 for 4 miles.
...of Harry, because he keeps lobbing these bombs. It never stops. I think that...
Protecting the Queen from all the people around him, you mean, that kind
exactly.
of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a most extraordinarily impertinent thing to say. An enraging thing to say. It would be true in any family to say, my God, you're the one who moved away. I was the one who was with Mum, So he, he keeps lobbing the bombs. And I think the book that he's going to write is going to be, that's really now become, I think, the biggest stumbling block to, reconciliation, because it hangs over them like this sort of Damocles. So, like, what is Harry going to say in this book? Are we going to be in another, a kind of massive kind of hate bomb again, which is going to explode all over us, and we're going to be trying to fight again the perception.
So they're waiting. They're waiting for this. In the meantime, you make the point that for the future of the royal family, almost everything now hangs on William and Kate. Talk a little bit about how much they have become the absolute future of the royal family. In a sense, without them, nothing.
Well, I think that certainly seems to me to be the case at the moment, and I think that's quite perilous for them. No one can be perfect, and we saw the last, Commonwealth tour go sideways, and that for them, I think, must have been rather traumatic, because they're used to being the ones who always seem to get it right, and all of a sudden, no, nothing can be depended on. So I think they need other players out there. It's interesting to see just recently how Princess Anne was out there with Kate. There was a sense of like, can we try new pairings? Can we sort of make this repertoire sort of look bigger than it is? Because Charles's great desire, often expressed in the last 25 years, was the quote "slim down monarchy." Well, hey, it's looking
pretty slim. pretty slim right now. You mentioned Charles there, Tina. Do you think there's any way that he's going to, as it were, get proper public affection when his mother dies? Do you think there's any way you can see Britain kind of warming to him as a monarch?
Actually, I can. I think that people are going to rally to Charles a bit. I think that it's such a big moment. People are going to want to see him for a time. At any rate, he will have a honeymoon, I think. Then it's a question of how he manages that honeymoon. He's got a huge challenge because he has to modernise. He has to now prepare the path for William. That is really...
In 2 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
When William comes in. Now, I don't know whether he will see that as his role, but that is his role. He's got to do the modernising. He's got to do, the sort of redeployment, that overhaul.
He won't like the thought of this, but you're basically saying he's a transitional figure.
He's a transitional figure, and he's either going to get it right or he's going to get it wildly wrong. We have, yet to see. But of course, that's what makes them so interesting to write about.
Indeed.
hanging there in the balance at the moment.
Moving briskly on, can you shed any light at all, Tina, on how it was that Andrew became so friendly with, of all people, Epstein?
Well, I think that Andrew, yes, I mean, I do know. I mean, I met this appalling man, Jeffrey Epstein, and he came in. I tell the story in my book about how he actually came and sat in my office and threatened me when I was publishing the expose about his sweetheart deal that got him pretty much a slap on the wrist for the first of his convictions.
What did he say to you, Tina?
Well, for a start, he got into my office without going through reception. That was the extraordinary thing. We were in the midst of publishing these stories, which were exposing for the first time the sweetheart deal with the prosecution in Florida, which allowed him just to be under house arrest with not any real punishment. And he wanted me to stop publishing these pieces, and I'd had his lawyer call to try to stop me doing so, and I had just gone ahead. I came back into my office from having been somewhere else, around. I came in. There he was sitting in my room.
So you literally walked into his office, you didn't know he was there, and you were there. That sounds
I had no idea he was there.
Fundamentally creepy.
It was so creepy. He was sitting there with these lizard-like eyes, dead cold. Like a
In a quarter of a mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
I have this image. I remember just being frozen in the doorway, and I said to him, well, I'd met him once before at the Clinton conference, the Clinton Global Initiative, just, briefly. And I said to him,
Exit at junction 6.
if you have a problem with something we're going to run, I suggest your lawyer talks to our lawyer at the Daily Beast. This is where when I was editor of the Daily Beast. And he said,
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Tuns Lane, A355.
And he walked out of my office and down into the elevator, and I was kind of stunned. And I then expected a blizzard of legal outreach. But actually what he decided to do instead was to go into a complete PR offensive about all of his philanthropies at the time. And he did all this kind of like press releases about stuff, foundations, all the kind of blather that goes with it. And I think he decided that, because this was pre-Me Too, and it was about 2010. I mean, he gambled, rightly, that there wouldn't be that much interest in him, who, although was a big financial wheeler dealer, wasn't really a big figure.
Not that well known.
No, not well known.
Yeah.
People were actually more interested in the Bill Clinton piece about what he was doing on Jeffrey's plane, which we also had in our piece. But he was a very sinister figure, but he was a very seductive figure. And, Andrew had always surrounded himself in terrible people all of his life. I mean, he's got the worst judgment about people, because he only mixes really with people who want something from him as royal gravitas, which is likely to mean that they are basically themselves dubious. And that's, of course, how he got sucked into the Epstein web.
Exit the roundabout onto Tuns Lane.
So that was why it was pure bad judgment, because this is one of those rare occasions, I think, when we can speak ill of the dead. Epstein, as you portray him and as we read about him, a particularly revolting creature. And yet Andrew believes that he is a close friend and sticks by him even when it's known what he's been up to. Absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, well, I mean, he has no judgment, Andrew. He is in a way naive. Epstein kind of...
In a quarter of a mile, slide left towards Sippenham Lane.
He didn't feel part of the big time. Andrew never felt part of the big time. He would have classic, son number two's kind of inferiority feelings, deservedly so. Epstein had all this money, big deals. He really suckered Andrew in. And Andrew thought he was his friend. I mean, that's what was really, in a sense, pathetic, actually.
Tina, hanging over our whole conversation is, of course, the thought that the Queen herself will not go on for very much longer. What's he going to do to this?
Slide left towards Sippenham Lane.
I think there's going to be a massive moment in this country. I think it's going to be a real pivotal point for this country, which has already had lots of kind of...
Continue for 1.5 miles.
You know, during the whole Brexit 3 years, which was a very divisive, partisan time, people have been left feeling, you know, the wounds of that are still kind of festering. I think, you know, it's a very tough economic moment. You know, it's people are feeling dreadfully insecure about so many things. The pandemic left everybody...
There's the Scottish Union, there's Ireland, there's all of this. So this is a moment of national trauma.
It's a moment of national trauma, and then the Queen dying, she's been on the money for 70 years, you know. I mean, 3 generations have known nothing but the Queen. So I do anticipate a very kind of a moment when everything is going to be very tremulous here. And
we've all lived our lives in a staunchly monarchist, royalist country, the United Kingdom. Do you think it's inevitable it carries on like that?
I mean, I don't see anything as inevitable, particularly in this moment when glaciers are melting, literally, around us. But I do think there isn't any really strong movement for eliminating the monarchy, that it is a prime sort of, still a focus of national identity. There aren't that many things anymore that bring the whole nation together, except perhaps football. That's it. Football and the monarchy. I don't think there's a great lust to see like a President Farage or a President Boris Johnson, you know. There is something, you know, that adds to national composure and a sense of its history, the thread that connects us through our own history, 1,000 years, good, bad, and brutal as it may have been. You know, the monarchy is the, you know, is the sort of sum total of all that.
Yes.
So, no, I don't see it.
You mentioned a couple of unappetizing thoughts as president, but I must ask you about one other president, President Trump. Do you think he's going to come back again now?
I think there's a strong possibility that he will come back. The country, you know, it's just as divided as ever. And the problem is we have in Biden a president who will be 80 when he next runs, and a vice president that nobody likes. So it's a very weakened Democratic Party, unless something, and American politics is always so kind of incredibly surprising in terms of different ways it can turn. Unless somebody comes out of the woodwork who's wildly charismatic and challenges Joe Biden. I mean, it's so unlikely. But it could happen, I suppose. But otherwise, if Trump wants to run, Trump, I think, could win.
Tina Brown, on that cheering and uplifting note, thanks very much indeed for talking to me. Tina Brown's The Palace Papers.
President Ma.
Out. I think not, but thank you very much for the thought. Tina, thank you. Certainly not. Now, coming up, a shocking LBC exclusive into child cruelty and neglect. You're listening to Andrew Marr on LBC, and the time is 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Andrew Pierce. The new boss of Sports Direct says the high street isn't dead. He would say that, wouldn't he? But is he right? Or is it all over for the high street because everybody's going online? Andrew Pierce on LBC.
At Free Now, we're best known for our taxis, but actually we're the mobility super app with more ways to get around. Travelling around London has never been easier.